Hey guys, it's Miss Sinclair for AP World History Modern, and today we are going to be learning about the Qin and Han Dynasties. This is the end of our Unit 0 lectures, so as you finish up, you should have a daily cover page for each of our PowerPoint lecture days. We should have summaries on all of those daily cover pages. You should have all the boxes filled out, and at this point you should start filling out a unit cover page if you haven't yet. You can find that on our Teams page as well. It's located in the sort of miscellaneous folder in files. The unit cover page is something that you will be turning in with our end of unit assignment. So on the day of the assessment, this unit cover page is due. Remember, I expect that you are taking notes on your own, that you are asking me questions as you have them. I can't read your mind, guys, so please make sure you're participating. So your bell work today is 3 multiple choice questions. I'm not going to read over them, but you are going to just answer them on your bell work. You just need to put the letter and just give me a few words of why you think this is the correct answer or why the other answers are wrong. You don't need to write a lot, but just give me maybe a sentence of justification for why you have picked this answer. We will go over the answers for this in our next Zoom meeting. Remind me if I forget. And this is a way for us to not only assess our own knowledge, but also practice justifying and thinking through, okay, what's the answer? Why is this the answer? But today we are talking about the Qin and Han Dynasties. So we are returning to China after a few days in the Mediterranean. So, are you ready? We're starting with the Qin Dynasty. So, if you remember, we left off China with the fall of the Zhou Dynasty. After the Zhou sort of lost power, you had what was known as the Warring States period. This time when you didn't have a single unified China, and instead you had several states fighting each other. So the Qin are going to create sort of our really first Chinese empire, and the ruler Shui Huangdi is going to really standardize Chinese society in a lot of ways. Forgive me for my pronunciation. I'm trying my best. But if I get things wrong, which I'm sure I will, I mean no disrespect. Please correct me if you know the right way to pronounce something, and I will try and incorporate that to the best of my ability. So let's talk about Shui Huangdi. So many people think that the reason why we call China, China, it is from the word Qin, right? The Qin Dynasty. The success of the Qin came from this long experience they had with fighting barbarian neighbors, the adoption of severe legalist methods, and the just personal ambition of Shui Huangdi. So remember, legalism is all about sort of authoritarian rule. It's all about the ruler having complete control over the citizens and the army. We see throughout Chinese history, a constant conflict between whatever power is governing China and different nomadic groups from Central Asia, from like Mongolia and like Kazakhstan. So the Qin were well equipped to unify China because they've been fighting these nomads for a long time. So Shui Huangdi is the first and main emperor of Qin China. If you look at the Qin dynasty, is really only around for like 20 years. It's not around for very long. He is super smart. He recognizes that the main weakness of the Zhou was feudalism. So he really centralizes power. He ends feudalism by capturing the feudal estates controlled by Chinese aristocrats. He created non-aristocratic officials to oversee the provinces, so you had no conflict of interest. He was a brutal ruler, though. His powerful army would crush any dissent, and he used legalism. He expected full obedience. So, he's going to create an incredibly strong and centralized state in China. In part, he's able to do this by eliminating all possible rivals and rival centers of authority. He established the pattern of primogenitor, which means that the eldest son inherits the whatever inheritance is, throne, wealth, home, whatever. He is going to create a strong bureaucracy. So, some of the other ways that he really standardizes things in China is he standardizes law, so codifies the law. He's going to standardize measurements. So something that's like an inch in California would also measure an inch in Massachusetts, right? Now this is so normal that we don't even think about it. But in the past, you would say like, oh, how far is it to this nearby village? And your neighbors, the people, might be using a completely different measure than what you're used to. He's going to standardize coinage. And by that, you do that by weight and writing. So this is really going to help China become unified and really strong, because now you have some consistent tools. So you can do trade with different regions. You can say, hey, I want 3 tons of wheat, and the measure of a ton will be the same across China. Writing will be standardized, so you can write letters to people across China. He's going to really follow the advice of his prime minister, Li Shi, and in following his legalistic views, he's really going to also suppress Confucianism. Remember, we're following this mandate of heaven, so when a new leader takes charge, often what they do is invest in infrastructure. We see this as well. He's going to build new irrigation projects to get water to fields. But ultimately, Shui Huangdi is going to be unpopular. He's going to burn books. He's going to tax heavily. He's going to institute a military conscription, which is the draft. Not very popular. So, to try and secure the nation's borders from northern raiders, the Qin are going to set a large military force to drive the nomads north. They constructed connections and extensions to builds that were already in Let me start over. They are going to construct connections and extensions to walls that are already built and already in place. So this is sort of the ancestor to the Great Wall of China. These old walls. Shui Huangdi is going to be the guy who really starts building the Great Wall of China. It was built primarily to protect China from outside invasions, and it is the largest construction project in human history. It's built primarily by forced labor, the process of corvée, so that's spelled C-O-R, V with an accent over. Now I'll write it down for you. You guys ready to see this like high tech? Boom. All right. C-O-R-V-E accent E. You're welcome. So this essentially means you have no compensation. This system is just forced labor. It's not slavery in the sense that you are enslaved for life, but like, okay, for the next year, you have to work on this wall. No, we're not paying you for it. And no, we're not going to provide for your family while you're gone. You just have to go do it, because otherwise we'll kill you and kill your family. So lots of people are going to die doing this. this is going to be a project that continues throughout multiple dynasties. So Shi Huangdi's attack on the nomads, right? He's sending the army north to try and push them back and away, is going to inadvertently unite the fragmented nomads, right? So he was being attacked by a bunch of small different groups. He starts a sort of cohesive campaign to push all these different groups back. These groups are like, hey, why don't we team up together and form the Zhuannu Confederacy? Essentially what he's going to do is force his enemies to unite, and they're going to become a threat that's going to be a problem for China for literally centuries to come. So good job, Shi Huangdi. To fill the different military and labor needs, the Qin government is going to institute an oppressive program of compulsory military and labor services, which will not make you popular. Shi Huangdi was also probably pretty crazy. He's going to die in 210 BCE, and he's going to build this huge tomb. So the famous Terracotta Warriors was built for Shi Huangdi with the Qin Dynasty. So it's guarded by a terracotta clay army of 7,000 soldiers. It was discovered only in the 1970s. The purpose was these soldiers would defend Shi Huangdi's tomb and help him rule in the afterlife. Essentially, he was like, I'm dying, oh no, I've conquered China, I want to keep power, I better bring an army with me to the afterlife so I can conquer the afterlife too. So you have over 7,000 individual soldiers, each one is life size. You can see here in the lower corner how originally they were painted. This is what they would have looked like, although now over time those colors have faded. You had 130 terracotta chariots, 520 horses. This is terracotta, so it's clay-based but unglazed ceramic. And we haven't actually even finished excavating it, so it's pretty cool. So I do want you to watch this. It's not very long. It is pretty cool. It's a TED Ed on the Terracotta Warriors. They talk about its discovery, how these were built. Every soldier is completely unique. It's not like they used a mold, which meant that each one had to be handmade. Like they found like the shapes of the ears are different. The clothing is different. The position in the army is different. One last thing about the Qin before we move on to the Han. Shi Huangdi's son is going to take power after him, and he is incompetent. He's a weak leader, possibly crazy as well. Shi Huangdi was using mercury to try and make himself immortal, which isn't good for your brain. He's not going to be able to stand up against the outbreaks of rebellion across China because everyone's really mad about the forced conscription to the army and the forced labor. So he's going to be overthrown. Okay, what kind of government did Qin use? So what was the sort of philosophical foundation of that government? Now we are changing dynasties. So the Qin dynasty is incredibly influential, but so short-lived. So the Han dynasty will be around for about 400 years. So if we're thinking about our chronology, what's happening around the world, the Han dynasty is around at the same time as Rome. The Han dynasty is going to be primarily a dynasty of emperors who ruled for about 400 years. But we also talk about the Han as an ethnic group. So the Han Chinese are an ethnic group that originated in the Yellow River Valley. So the Persian, the Han, and the Romans all extended their military power by developing supply lines and building up their infrastructure, including roads and walls. So that's a good similarity between empires that existed in different regions of the world. So, Gaozu is going to be our leader. He starts out as a peasant who will end up defeating all sort of the other contenders, establishing control of China. He will establish a political system that drew both on Confucian philosophy as well as legalism. Rulers faced challenges at first from the residual resentment of the ruthless rule of the Qin. So, to help build goodwill, they reduced taxes. They're going to reduce government spending. They are going to gather any surplus rain and distribute it to the hungry. So, for those who had helped him, Gaozu is going to restore the system of feudal grants that the Zhou had originally used and had been abolished by the Qin. So remember, the Zhou had developed a feudal system, and that led to their downfall. The Qin were like, nope, getting rid of that. Now land's going to be governed by government workers. Well, to reward people who were loyal, the Han are going to take that land and give it to followers, sort of making a pseudo-feudal system. After a confrontation with the Zhuangnu Confederacy, the Han lose. It's kind of embarrassing. So instead, they develop a policy of appeasement. Essentially, they just buy off the Zhuangnu Confederacy every year with gifts of rice, silk, wine. He's even going to marry a Han princess to the leader of the Zhuangnu. So rather than fight them every year consistently, he's just going to pay them. So you can see the growth of the Han Dynasty. This is going to be our largest dynasty. So, Emperor Wu is going to be really the most significant emperor in Han China. He is really going to increase the land territory. So when he was young, China was ruled by Empress Liu. So an empress played a really important role in deciding which son would become emperor. All right, so quick understanding of the Chinese emperors' relationships. So the Chinese emperor would only have one wife, right? He would have an empress, like, this is my official wife. She is the empress. But then he might have dozens or more concubines, right? These sort of official mistresses who he would sleep with and who would live kind of like princesses. They would live in luxury at the castle, at the palace. But their task was really only to serve at the emperor's pleasure. So he would sleep with the empress as well as sleeping with all of these different concubines and have children by all these different women. So who became emperor after him? Well, it might be the son of the empress, his official wife, or it might be the son of one of these other concubines. They would look at who was born first and best equipped. And this is where the empress had a lot of influence, a lot more influence than a concubine. So, oftentimes these empresses would pick weak and incompetent rulers, emperors, heirs that they could then control. Be like, oh, Junior here, he's too young to rule himself, so I, as empress, now that my husband has died, will rule for him until he grows up and he's big enough. And by that point, they've kind of trained him up to listen to whatever the empress says. So after his grandmother died, Wu decided to rule for himself. He is going to expand the empire into areas as far as northern Vietnam, Manchuria, and North Korea. So if we're looking at the map, right, You can see how far south and east he's going to go, and eventually he's going to head west. To pay for, let me go back real fast. He will eventually expand Chinese territory into the northwest and really start the foundation of the Silk Road. The Silk Road is an incredibly important concept. We'll be spending a lot of next unit talking about the Silk Road. Essentially, it is a system of trade connecting East Asia to the Middle East and Europe. And it's really under the Han that it gets its start. It's a land route for trade, as opposed to the sea routes of the Indian Ocean trade system. So, he originally starts going west because he needs more horses for his cavalry. Horses originate from Central Asia. To pay for this military buildup, Wu is going to institute government monopolies on high profit commodities, salt, iron, alcohol. So essentially the government controls the prices of this, so he can then jack the prices up and make a lot of money. He will adopt Confucianism as the state belief system. He will use Confucian scholars as officials in the government, who in turn expected exemplary ethical behavior from their rulers. Remember, Confucianism is all about everyone behaving rightly. If we all just treat each other with the proper amount of respect, then we'll be fine. So, he is going to, one of his, this guy, sorry, I lost my spot in my notes. He's going to decree that nobles must divide up their land among their sons, and thus he forces some of the really large estates to be broken up. So if you have 5 sons, great, your land's now divided 5 ways. So this is going to remove power from the elites. He will also set up trade connections, trade routes with the Parthian Empire. Remember, that's where Persia was, the Romans, India. And as he expands trade, other things will diffuse along those roads as well. Religions like Buddhism and Christianity, as well as disease. So, what about his government system? Well, we are going to see that a examination system is going to develop. It is a process for selecting civil servants. It's a process for selecting government workers. So rather than relying on nepotism, hey, I know a guy so I can get a job, it's like, let's take a test to make sure the people who are actually working in government are competent. So it is under Emperor Wu that we're going to see the creation of the civil service exam. And it will require that all civil servants have formal training in Confucianism. This is going to be a continuity that will be in existence with every other Chinese dynasty. So this is a huge continuity. And it's one of the reasons why Confucianism is so influential. So he creates essentially an entire social class of these sort of scholar bureaucrats who don't have hereditary positions. So it's not like, oh, but because my father had this job, I will have this job. So this is one of the things that really contributes to the Han stability. So let's talk a little bit about Chinese society. So in both China, Han China, and in Rome, slavery was indispensable. It made up the foundation of your economic system. Population was about 60 million, and family was the basic unit of society. Family was viewed as an unbroken chain of generations, including your ancestors, which is one of the reasons why Ancestor Veneration is such a big part of Chinese culture at this time. The idea was that ancestors took an active interest in the affairs of the current generation, that they were routinely consulted, appeased, and honored. So the family would be dominated by the oldest male, as reflected in the hierarchy of society. Remember, Confucianism is very patriarchal. It's all about proper filial piety. So, interdependent relationships were more important than the individual. The status and authority of women really depended on how rich they were. Women in the royal family could expect to have some political influence, but for the most part, this was a highly patriarchal society where women had very few rights. A young wife was expected just to be obedient and submissive to her husband as well as her mother-in-law. So you get married, you move into your husband's house where his parents live and his siblings, like these are multi-generational households. And the mother-in-law is sort of in charge of all the women. So all women were expected to be obedient to the men. And one of the things that we see is very important is the unity within unity within the extended family. So, patriarchy based on Confucianism. Women would get power through their sons or their husbands. The oldest male would often inherit. Children would be punished for disobedience, not only because they should have obeyed, but because they weren't showing proper filial piety, according to Confucianism. So during the Han Dynasty, the capital was in Shenyang, which is located in the east. It was easily defended and had good access to trade routes. The elite lived in elegant, multi-storied homes and broad, well-paved boulevards. The emperor's family would live in the Forbidden City, dress in fine silks, were connoisseurs of art and literature. Right? They would be entertained. Basically around the world, if you were rich, you had time to read, you had time to study art, you had jugglers and entertainment. Whereas if you were poor, you lived in crowded tenement housing, close together, unplanned, no sewage, disease, everyone worked. So the gentry was sort of this unique social class for China. These are local officials who come from moderately wealthy, educated landowners, right? So this is part of these scholar gentry. So the gentry will really establish Confucianism as their ideology and will pursue careers in the civil service, often paying to have their sons train in the same profession. You also have merchants, but merchants were... Here's a key difference between Chinese culture and other cultures in the world. Merchants were at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Like a farmer, a poor farmer would be considered higher on your social hierarchy than a wealthy merchant. The idea is that merchants are kind of like parasites. They're greedy. They're taking someone else's hard work and just selling it, right? The farmer worked day in and day out, slaved for months to grow this rice, and the merchant just sells it in a day and he makes more money. Chinese men were required to give 2 years of military service, would often spend their time at the far-flung reaches of the empire. However, you didn't have to serve in the military if you passed the exam and worked in the government. So, social classes were hereditary but not stagnant. You could work your way up the social hierarchy. The economy is going to be strong during the Han Dynasty. The standardization of weights and measures by the Qin really helps to facilitate trade. We see an extensive internal trade using copper coins. Trade is going to be focused on luxury items, silk, jewelry, leather, furniture. Trade is not highly valued in Chinese society, though. Right? Learning is more emphasized than wealth. Of course, the foundation of all societies at this time is agriculture. So we see the expansion into the Yangtze River Valley. Wheat will be grown in the north, rice grown in the south, And the result is this massive population boom. So, how did Imperial China evolve under the Qin and Han Dynasties? All right. New forms of thought and belief. We'll talk about Buddhism next unit, the birth of Buddhism, when we talk about the Indian subcontinent. But Buddhism is around at this point. And we see that Buddhism will be introduced to China through trade and will grow. So the Han period is going to be rich in intellectual developments. The scholar Gentry will read and write in a range of genres in their spare time. You have astrologers, you have historians, you have technological achievements like the water mill, where water wheels, a usable horse collar. So instead of having the collar be here, right, pushing on your trachea, you have the horse collar more go across the shoulders, so then the horse can pull more weight for a longer time. The invention of paper, a reliable crossbow trigger, which is good because an unreliable crossbow trigger ends up with people getting shot. An accurate calendar with 365 days. Thousands of roads developed across China to facilitate trade and military movement, as well as a huge canal system facilitating trade and irrigation, connecting the northern and southern river systems. They are going to observe the movements of the planets and the stars, and we see an early seismograph. So you see it located right here in the center with all the frogs. Essentially, this thing is perfectly balanced, and in the mouth of each of the dragons is a ball, right? Just balanced between its teeth. So if there was an earthquake anywhere miles away, if it was right underneath it, they would all fall, but like miles away from the seismograph, this thing's so sensitive that it would cause just enough shaking that the ball would drop out of the dragon's mouth and into the frog's mouth, making a large gong. And they would know, oh, there was a earthquake that way in the east, because only the dragons on the eastern side dropped the balls, which is pretty neat. It's going to help them measure earthquake strength as well, how many dragons dropped things. They have medical research, they have ox-drawn plows, they have iron mining. It's just huge. We also have, We also have new political institutions. Like Rome, Han China had a strong non-hereditary bureaucracy. That means an effective government that competent people could get jobs in. In classical China, the belief that the desirability of central government is created. Why? Well, government is seen as providing services for the people. So you want a strong functioning government. It's not seen as a threat. So the expansion of state functions will allow the government to reach the common people. The power of the emperor will really expand during the Qin and Han dynasties. And we see the development of a really educated class of bureaucrats. Religion. Okay, Chinese people are going to be believing in a number of natural spirits who they will worship and appease. So generally animist, polytheistic, but that goes along with these different philosophies. So you might, leave an offering for your ancestors, leave an offering for the river spirit, and follow Taoism, and follow Confucianism, right? These are not mutually exclusive things. So you have Taoism and then Confucianism, which we've already talked about. But new is going to be Buddhism. Buddhism will be introduced to China around the 1st century CE and will spread through merchants. Because Buddhism will call for monks to withdraw from families and abstain from sex, it comes in conflict with Confucian beliefs in the family and the procreation of children to maintain the cult of ancestors, right? If your son is like, I'm going to become a monk and not have any more kids. You're like, who's going to worship the ancestors? Who's going to keep them appeased? Now bad things are going to happen to us. It will eventually become very popular among the common people in China. I like this painting. You have Confucius holding baby Buddha and handing him to Laozi, the founder of Taoism. Okay. Decline of the Han. Last slide of notes. You guys have done a really good job. So, like Rome, all good things must come to an end. And like Rome, we see invasions by borderland people will lead to their fall. We see weak leadership, just like in Rome, emperors more interested in their own comfort and wealth than serving their country. The Han Dynasty will ultimately be undermined by an imperial court who's more focused on drama and gossip than governing, lacks leadership. Nobles and merchants who are building up large land holdings and a lot of wealth and not paying taxes like they should. So that means the government needs money, so they're going to increase taxes on peasants, and that's going to make the peasants really unhappy. The system of military conscription will break down, and so to have a functioning government and military, the government's going to start paying mercenaries who aren't very loyal. And you add corruption, peasant uprisings, disease, and we see a period of political fragmentation. We see in 184 CE, the Yellow Turban Rebellion, which is a large peasant uprising against the government leadership. We see Taoist revolutionaries and peasants rebel, frustrated by the corruption of the government. The Zhuangnu Confederacy is going to start invading again. And after this, we have about 3 centuries of China in chaos, no clear leadership. So I would like you to compare the decline of the Han to the decline of the Romans. And I'd like you to watch this video. It's about 6 minutes long. You can find it on our YouTube playlist, or you can just Google search its history, Imperial China is Born. It's going to give you a really good overview of Qin and Han China. Now some practice questions. Are you ready? You're going to answer this on Edpuzzle. We're starting with a source. The word that my camera is covering is of. So I'm not going to read this for you. You have the possibility to read it. However, please note the author, right? This is a secondary source. That means it's been written recently and it's people writing about what happened in the past. It's not a first-hand account of what happened. So pause the video so you can read this, because I'm going to switch slides. All right, question 1. The author's view of the Yellow Turban Uprising discussed in the passage is best understood in the context of which of the following? So remember, the tricky thing about these source-based questions is that it's not an obvious answer. You have to think through it carefully. A good way to do that is to eliminate. I know it's not answer blank, so we'll just remove it from contention altogether. Remember, just pause the video if you need more time. The social issues that led to the Yellow Turban Uprising discussed in the passage contributed to which of the following? In addition to the issues discussed in the passage, which of the following was also a challenge faced by the Han government? Okay, so you're going to answer all 3 of these questions in Edpuzzle, and I'm not going to go over the answers in this lecture. So for your summary in the end of our Unit 0 lectures, I would like you to compare and contrast the Roman and the Han empires. Remember, comparing and contrasting are some of those important historical thinking skills. Consider their economy, their multi-ethnic citizens, their militaries, and their governments. Thanks, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. Have a great day.